Now, concerning spaced repetition software, the big question is when to use it. So when it comes to studying languages, especially studying classical languages, we have different modes of studying. For example, we can read texts, we can study the grammar, we can even read up upon secondary literature in order to get a better understanding of the context of the text we want to study. And understand that Anki is one of the modes of study. So it's a very mechanical but highly effective way of studying. So my my hypothesis is, or my point is, if you only study one language, Anki would perhaps rather slow you down a bit if you want to have quick progress, or if you want to progress fast. However, with two or more languages, I find it absolutely essential. Now, hear me out on this. When I was studying classical Chinese, I was together with students from the Korean department, and they were studying, of course, Korean. And as a second language, they could choose, for example, classical Chinese. Now, since they have already studied 2 years of Korean, when they came to classical Chinese, they didn't need to focus so much on Korean anymore. Hence, they could almost solely focus on classical Chinese and keep the Korean like on really on autopilot, because they can still watch Korean movies and everything, converse in Korean and so on. With a modern language, it's not so difficult to keep up. I just completed a year or a few years of Sanskrit, and I studied as well Chinese and classical Tibetan. And then when I came to classical Chinese, this was just putting another load on top of it. So it really took it out of me. And when I made my notes, it took me much longer, of course, than the people from the Korean department. And I was thinking, oh wow, I take much longer than these guys who study without Anki, and I seem to progress much slower. However, later on, I feel that my progress seems to be more sustainable because I can keep it up for a longer period. Even after the course is done, I can still revise much more easily. So, meaning initially Anki takes a lot of time, but to set up, especially if you write it yourself, but it pays afterwards in like huge. It has a huge fruit, a huge return on investment, I find. And if you want to study modern languages, you don't even need to write your own card deck. You can just download one. I have a good example from my friend who went to Japan, and before going to Japan, he didn't know Japanese, but he did an intensive course in Japan in Japanese, and he downloaded a card deck which was I think about 2,000 cards, and he just was going after it. And he really like put the pedal to the metal, and he was studying like 100 or 200 cards per day. And within a few weeks, he was on a conversational level and he was good to go to Japan. So for this example, you don't need to write yourself. You don't need to write a card deck. You can just take the next best one and go and like study it. For classical languages, we were always encouraged to write our own card decks, because the card decks which were prepared, or the entries you find in dictionaries, they might not be to our standard. That's why it's always best to write it yourself. Now, moreover, Anki encourages you, when you study with Anki, it encourages you to study more and more, and you can come back to your studies more easily if you had long breaks of studies, because you can always check your own notes, you can always revise. So always checking dictionaries, not writing anything down, always checking the dictionary is not the cure. The cure is that you have everything what you want to study in one place, that it becomes psychologically also easier for you to really to study, and it will encourage you. Ultimately, you want to reach a stage that you can read easy to intermediate difficult text in without much help, meaning without consulting the grammar or the dictionaries all the time, so that you have sustainable progress over a long period of a stretch. If you only study a modern language, you might be quicker without Anki. But if you want to have a more sustainable progress, especially if you have longer study gaps, you can be much quicker, or it can be much more sustainable with Anki. If you study 2 languages, for example, if you do it without Anki, you must already have a good discipline in order to pull it off, especially with classical languages. However, if you study 3 languages, it's really not possible. I would feel, and I have not really seen anybody who did 3 languages and had a good grasp of 3 languages without studying with any spaced repetition software, be it Anki or any other program. For example, I know a few lecturers and professors who have, for example, good Sanskrit and good Tibetan, but their Chinese is very weak. Or they have good Sanskrit and good Chinese, but their Tibetan is very weak. So one of these languages will always just be neglected and will not be that strong. With Anki, you can really maintain all the languages evenly if you wish to. So my point is, if it is 2 or more languages that you want to study, especially classical languages, it's easier and more sustainable with Anki or with any spaced repetition software. And if you study 3 or more languages without Anki or any spaced repetition software, well, understand, you will get your PhD in pain, but you won't have any gain. So really just don't do it yourself. All right, guys. Put your comments and questions down below. And if you found this video helpful, then like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you never miss a video when I put one out. All right, guys, I will see you soon. Bye-bye.